You're listening to Real Investor Radio with Craig Fuhr and Jack Bevere, where we cover advanced real estate investing topics to help you stay ahead of the curve in your real estate investing business. Yes, we're always primping before the show. Welcome back to Real Investor Radio. I'm Craig Fuhr, joined again by Jack Bevere. Jack, good to see you.
Absolutely, you too, sir. Beautiful morning. Excited to talk to today's guest again.
Yeah, me too. We sometimes record these podcasts in advance because our guests are all pretty busy guys. Jack's a busy guy, and we recorded a podcast with Danny, who we'll introduce in just a second, a few weeks ago. I would advise everyone to go and check out that podcast first. It was really great. Danny is an amazing investor of many years. Started off in the technology business, then got his master's in finance, went to work in the mortgage industry, learning that side of the business. Stop me if I mess anything up here, Danny. But then started a company called, I don't know if it was Pia Residential back then, Danny, but one of the things that I'll just throw, Jack, I'm just going to bring him in. Danny, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're easy here. No formalities.
I just want to say that I always have time for Jack. Jack never has time for me. So, it's always a pleasure to be here.
He's globetrotting.
I know.
Jack, how was Greece, by the way, before we jump in?
Oh, he got frozen. There you go.
Oh, yeah, I froze there for a second. I'm back.
How was Greece, Jack?
Greece was great. I went to Greece with the wife for 2 weeks. We flew into Athens, did a little island hopping, Mykonos, Naxos, Santorini, and Crete, and then flew back to Athens. It was an awesome trip. Highly recommend.
You've been to a lot of places, especially recently, it feels like. So how did Greece rank in the list of destinations for you?
Yeah, I think I've probably got about 60 stamps in the passport over the years. So I've always traveled a lot, and it's one of my favorite things to do, and definitely one of my favorite things to do with my wife. And Greece was way up there. It's been on the bucket list for a long time. I mean, it's as beautiful as the pictures. The food's excellent. It's just an easy place to travel, not terribly expensive. So it's kind of hard not to love it.
Economically speaking, how are they faring these days? What's the political climate like there? Did you catch any of that vibe?
I don't know, man. We were hanging out in the touristy spots for the most part. I don't know that I got a great sense for that.
Yeah.
It wasn't like terribly
Argentina.
expensive. Yeah, it wasn't Argentina. Yeah, which was a trip I did more recently, or just previously. It wasn't terribly expensive though. Like even in the most touristy spots, it was like being in a normal American city. So. Which gave me the sense that probably if I wasn't in the touristy spots, it was probably quite affordable to be there. So, yeah.
Well, let's get back to Danny. Danny, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for taking the time once again to come on. Seriously, man, the last episode, everyone has to listen to it. Danny is quite a character, but also incredibly knowledgeable about all things real estate. And so I would advise everyone to go back and take a listen. Your career has been nothing short of amazing. And one of the things, honestly, Danny, that blows me away about you, man, is you're not a guy that sits behind the desk. You talk about walking through 6,000 houses to buy 400. You're just a boots on the ground guy, which I think obviously Jack and Fred love about you as well because they're the same. But yeah, man, welcome to the show. Can't wait to jump in with you.
Thank you, Craig. And Jack, thank you again for the chance of being here. You kind of got it right, Craig. I mean, I'm originally from Colombia, South America, an engineer, did investment banking after my MBA, came back here, started .com and then telecom, and then I saw sort of the bubble kind of real estate forming, and I got into mortgages because I wanted to understand, how the mortgages were originated, because I knew that when it blew out, there was an opportunity to buy them. I don't know if I talked about this last time, but my boss at Countrywide thought that I was a corporate spy or I was writing a book because why would a guy with a Wharton MBA be originating mortgages with, people who barely graduated high school? And I told him, listen, I was there to learn, the system inside and out. You're correct. I'm a kind of guy that if you were going to and Jack, we're gonna go open a McDonald's. I'll be like, hold on, I go flip burgers for 4 months because I need to know how it works.
Mm-hmm.
That's the engineering in me, right? And Jack will tell you that, obviously I'm not the super organized person, right? What's the name of that profile? Like, not the Maverick, but the kamikaze.
I think you're a daredevil. Yeah.
Daredevil. There you go. Don't give me organization. I cannot do it. I don't think outside the boxes. For me, there's no box, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I think that we did well. I mean, it's one of those things that, if you really think about it, back in 2008, 9, when houses were, a dime a dozen, it was very cheap. Nobody was thinking logically. I mean, it kind of took a little bit of, I will say, a disorganized type of person who doesn't really believe in boundaries to say, I'm going to go buy 100, 200, 300 houses. Not that Fred is that way or Jack is that way, but they're already in the business before that started, right, Jack?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, that happened upon. Yeah, that was an opportunistic thing. Yeah.
Right. So I had the opportunity the other day. I was in a conversation with a friend, and says, "Oh, you guys were lucky you bought at the right time." And I got pissed at him, and we almost, I wouldn't call it a fist fight, but I got furious because I'm like, screw you, man. We, in 2008, 9, 10, we were seen like the idiots who were buying houses.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I remember going to a guy who had many, many, many millions of dollars in the bank and saying, hey, you know what? Let's buy this house. It's your house, because we were not a fund. We were not buying with other people's money. And, a fund was like, it's your house. Madoff had happened. Bunch of other funds, collapsed. It's like, so we realized that, to go out and tell people to invest with a bunch of people they don't know, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, it's your house. You tell us, who do we put it in? You want to rent it? We rent it. You want to, you want to give it to a girlfriend? Give it to a girlfriend. Whatever it is, it's your house. If we rent it to Section 8, which is the government, you're going to get a 12% cap rate.
Mm-hmm.
Cap rate, not IRR, zero. It was like, the government is paying you a 12% bond. And people back then were like, nah, it's too risky. Maybe the economy is going to collapse again. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? If it collapses again, like, Citibank was trading at $1, right? I mean, it would have been the debacle on the banking system. The banks were teetering on failure. I mean, this was like a world global, recession with an added problem, which is the government didn't help. I will say the government actually not only did it not help, they just basically catalyzed the whole, spiral, right? Because, there were a lot of mortgages that originated Freddie and Fannie, and instead of them saying, hey, we own the mortgages, let's see how we can help. We do understand that somebody can be upside down and there's a reason for them not to pay, right? Because why will you pay a $200,000 mortgage when your house is $100K?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of them saying, you know what, we get it, don't worry about it, right? Pay $100 or whatever it is, stay there as a renter. They just basically facilitated that foreclosure. And, that's I think that's a big difference that is happening right now, that people think, oh, there might be a second debacle. I don't think it's going to happen. Number one, the system is well primed with money. Number two, all the loans that are there are very stable. Okay. But number three, I think that the government after COVID learned its lesson. When there's a lot of pain, they have to come and help. So long story short, we started buying houses in 2008, 9. 2008, actually it was September 2008, we bought a house in Pompano. And then after that, we kept on buying with other people's money. Eventually, we raised a little bit of money from friends and family. And then, Warren Buffett sort of kickstarted this industry by saying, it's not a bad asset class if it was practical. Wall Street got in. We started having conversations. We ended up getting $60 million from somebody we knew out of Latin America who was an industrialist, that he liked the platform we had done. I mean, at that moment, we had our own warehouse and, W-2 employees, a construction company. So back to you, Craig, it was called PIA Group back then.
Mm-hmm.
Started PIA, Property Investment Advisors, right? And then it became, PIA Construction, PIA Property Management Advisors, and then PIA Group, which is the holding. And, in 2012 was the first IMN. That's where we met Jack and Fred. and we started collaborating.
That's when it all changed for you, man. That's when it really.
That's when I want, being a clueless guy to really meeting some intellectual guys from Baltimore. But
yeah, that's a crock of shit.
Yeah, we dove into a lot of that in the first episode, and the history. Why don't you fast forward us to the point where you grow the platform to 400 plus single family and small multifamily.
Sure.
There was an opportunity to, I guess, sell off that portfolio, or at least most of it, and then sort of take us to exactly where you are today, with not only buying larger multifamily apartment complexes, but also with we'll get into Sell2Rent too, which Jack and I are very excited to hear about.
Sure. So again, we grow this company. It's 2016, I remember, more or less, and we started seeing that the rents are not growing as fast as the prices, and we believe that one of the cool things about the single family asset class is it's basic, like it's the cow's worth the milk it gives. It's about cash flow, right? So as I mentioned last time, I think that we have three steps, three pillars of sort of real estate: replacement cost, your cap rate as to your cost of capital, and your economic cost. Your economic cost is is it cheaper to rent a house than buy it, or is it cheaper to buy it than rent it? If it's cheaper to buy it than rent it, you should be buying houses. If it's cheaper to rent a house than buying it, you should be selling houses in a way, right? But then, and so we decided it's time to sell. We eventually got an offers from a bunch of the funds, and we ended up selling to Cerberus a bunch of our properties. And then we pivoted to large multifamily. And this happened in 2018. One of the first things that we did is we created a platform to go buy large multifamily. And, I think as an entrepreneurs, we have to recognize that we don't know everything, and there's a lot of talent out there. Mm-hmm. And for us to say, well, we've done something that is really, really, really hard, which is manage 600 single family doors and 400 single family doors and 400 small multifamily doors in South Florida. And we said, the larger multifamily play, it's a big, it's different. And so we brought in a lot of talent from the multifamily world, and we created PR Residential, which is our sort of institutional type of multifamily investment platform. And we got out of South Florida. We thought it was frothy. And we bought our first property in 2019 in Pensacola, then 2020 after COVID in Jacksonville, 2021 Savannah, 2022 Fayetteville, 2022 towards the end we created a PR Residential fund, which it's an investment vehicle. Everybody's welcome to come to our page, prresidential.com, and look at our fund. We bought a property in Birmingham. In 2023, we did not buy anything, but we put something on the contract that, hopefully, and thanks to God, we are closing today, which is a 232 unit property in Atlanta. That was a sort of $50 million property with a $20 million equity raise, and we're raising that today. We're finished. We're closing that today.
You're settling on the property today.
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
I'm talking to you guys instead of being, signing documents, but that's okay.
Nice.
So it's not important.
Along the way there, I remember a couple years ago, we're at a conference. You'll have to refresh me on exactly what year it was, but you mentioned this. You had this idea about that you were calling Sell2Rent, and
yes,
the idea was that people are that this is getting the market, I think, has really moved right towards this idea in a higher interest rate environment, tighter credit environment. There are people who have a lot of equity in their house, and they can't tap that equity because HELOC rates are super high, and they may not have the debt to income, or they may have a credit issue. But they've got a ton. But everyone has a ton of equity in their house right now, especially with the run up in prices of 2021. There's a lot of equity, and so that's keeping transaction volumes low, and so the market's looking for ways for those folks to be able to tap that equity, but they don't want to leave, right? Like they live in that property. They have a
Yes.
ton of equity. They can't access the conventional mortgage market isn't allowing them to access that equity. And one of the I just freaking love Danny is like talking to Danny, especially after like at the bar, is like you're talking about he's connecting dots. He's connecting dots for things like there is, like he said, there is no box, right? Like he's connecting dots from like all over the freaking universe, all over the industry. And he just does it like he just does it like he breathes. Like that's just how he breathes, you know? And so he'll just be throwing ideas at you, and you got to like sit there and like really concentrate and like to keep up with talking with him. And then he says this freaking, you know, but he connects them in brilliant ways. And it's like my favorite thing. And so this sell to rent idea is, I feel like, you know, right out of that playbook. So what, you know, talk to us about, you know, that business and the thesis behind it and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I mean, and Danny, we've got time, so I'd love for you to start at the very beginning when this idea sort of came into your head, and you see the problem, and you've already explained you're not a box thinker, and so the idea comes into your head. How do you sort of macerate it and sort of mature it over time to get it to a place where it is today?
So Sell2Rent comes out of a pain of the heart, right? When we were, and this probably happened to you, Jack, also, right? When you were buying houses, and I walked into 6,000 homes to buy 400. I know we went over this last time. When you are the person who walking in, and you know, back in 2008, I had one. My daughter was born in 2007, then in 2009, and then in 2014. Okay. So when I was buying houses, when I was, you know, walking into all these houses, I had two newborns. And when you walk into a house and you see the pink room and the blue rooms, and you realize, holy shit, there's a family who got uprooted here, right? It's painful, man. I mean, you're like, yes, I'm making money and the whole thing, and this is my business, and, you know, but at the end, when you're taking the pictures of the inside and you see the things that they left on the wall, right? And, you know, sometimes the toys, and, you know, how sometimes the sheriff came in and they couldn't take over. And again, this is not in the best of neighborhoods, right?
Absolutely.
So in one hand, you know, you have your heart, and the other hand, you have your, you know, spidey sensors in the back, just making sure you don't get killed, right? And that was a pain. And, you know, my background, again, I'm from Colombia, you know, South America, where we grew up. I mean, I didn't grow up poor, right? I never needed anything in my life. Thankfully, we grew up well. But my mom was a social worker. And so she used to take us to all these places where you have like kids from the streets, right? So I grew up with this conscience that, you know, you have to like do well in society. I mean, you know, part of, you know, your responsibility in society is to make sure that you change it for the better. So if you put yourself in my shoes, walking into 6,000 homes, and in most cases, these are 3-2s or 4-2s, which means that probably they'll have families, right? That was a pain. And at some point in my mind, as Jack said, you know, I see a problem, I have to solve it. It just got there. A couple years later, I'm leasing one of the houses, and I'm there, you know, leasing the house. I mean, at that time, we already had leasing agents and the whole thing. I don't know why I was there, probably destiny. And the guy says, you know, Danny, you see that house in the corner? Yes, that used to be mine. And, you know, suddenly I owe, I don't know, $250,000 to the bank. The house is worth, next door sold it for 70 or 80. And I called the bank and I said, you know what? I want to stay, but I'm not going to pay a mortgage for $250. Right? There's no jobs in the street. I remember people calling me crying, friends of mine with, you know, good careers, which is basically, Danny, man, can I just go paint houses, do whatever it is? Because, by the way, Craig and Jack, back then we didn't have Uber, right? There was no gig economy.
Right.
So if you're an engineer or a, you know, an MBA with, you know, whatever it is, you just got fired from your job. There's no jobs. What do you do?
Not a whole lot of opportunity, right?
Right? So there's a lot of pain. Uh, and this is where the government, I think, that kind of screwed up, right? And this is what basically what happened is, instead of allowing people to stay in their homes, they basically got foreclosed. It would have been much easier if they said, you know what, stay in the home, right? Pay your mortgage or pay your rent, and you have some sort of like way of buying it back. But no, right? That created the opportunity. And, unfortunately, we bought a lot of homes that were foreclosed. And when you walk into those homes, you can feel that bad energy. I mean, there's pain.
Absolutely.
Right? So with the words of that gentleman, I forgot his name. I can picture his face. I'm like, there's a problem here I need to solve. But then what happens is you go back to the business again of, buying houses, renting houses, fixing it, dealing with tenants, and all the BS that it's dealing with tenants. At that moment, a lot of our tenants were Section 8.
But it stuck with you. It stuck with you.
So I think it kind of stuck, but it didn't. It's just kind of like went there. It wasn't like a problem that was top of mind.
Mm-hmm.
At that moment, the top of mind problem is, how do I finance on my portfolio? How do I make sure that I keep them rented? And it was more like operationals. So 2018, we're selling our portfolio to Cerberus, and one of the things that we did is we just basically said, I took a big spreadsheet, because I'm a visual person, right? And kind of like started looking at every property that we had and how much money we had put in the property. So I can say to Cerberus, this is what we did. We changed the AC, all these things. And, but along that, we have this big spreadsheet, and you start to see how much money you paid in commissions and how much money you didn't make because it was vacant, and the turnover cost and the maintenance cost. And you go like, holy shit. One thing is to see like, oh, it's 8% of income. But when that 8% becomes an 8% of a very large number, right? And you see the very large number, you go like, holy crap, right? And I'm like, why people don't treat their homes as their own? Mm-hmm. And that's the light bulb moment. That is where I think that sometimes when you have an open mind and you have a problem inside, somehow that problem kind of surfaces to, your mind at that time, and you kind of connect the dots.
You said why why people don't treat the homes like their own, or that pride factor.
Yeah. Even though you are a renter, it's your home.
Yes.
This is not the rental car that you do for the weekend.
Danny, I'll just let you gather your thoughts there, but I was listening to a podcast you were on last night, and you spoke so eloquently about the need for housing, and it's not like food. If you need food, you go to a shelter, you get some food, or down to the local church, and maybe you pick up some food at the food bank. But everybody needs a roof over their head. And and I know that Jack and Fred must think about this all the time. We provide these, I've seen the Dominion houses when they go in and they rehab these things for tenants, and they don't even think Jack calls them tenants anymore. They're clients, they're customers. And the question is, why would they ever not treat it with pride? Why would they ever not treat it as their own, right? If you've got a great landlord who really cares about the property, gave you a great property, why would you not treat it as your own? So go ahead.
Well, I live with my 3 daughters and my wife here and a dog. So sometimes you walk into my house and you're like, dude, don't you own the house?
I've seen my son's room before. Yeah, I get it.
So, but the whole concept kind of starts thinking through the problem. And I go, wait, hold on. What does somebody who owns a home and needs money? And Jack, by the way, I'm going to get to your logic behind what you said, because you were very logical in explaining the problem. Okay? But I think that this is not a logical problem. This is an emotional problem. I'll get to it. And I said, this is a leaseback. Right? When you sell your home, cash out, and stay as a renter, there's a leaseback. Now, you have leasebacks for industrial parks, right, for locomotives, for airplanes, for everything.
Yeah.
But the largest asset class in the world by far is residential. If you think about it, anybody in the world either rents a house or owns a home. Even the favelas, right? Like, house made out of cardboard. Somebody's either paying rent or somebody's, Like everybody has a place to stay in most cases. Obviously, there's homelessness. We can talk about that, but everybody in the world has a house, which is the largest asset class in the world. So I'm like, why there's no residential leasebacks? And I thought, Craig, that this was illegal. I'm like, well, such an obvious thing.
Yeah.
It must be illegal, right? It must be something where you cannot
Sure.
sell the house and rent it back. It doesn't make sense.
Surely someone would have thought about it before you.
Sure, I'm not the first idiot to think about this thing. And I'm sure I wasn't, right? Maybe I'm the first one with the passion to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can find out that there's other people doing it. You know, that's very cool. Kind of validate your idea, right? It's when I did the digital trading cards back in 2000, and people thought that man, you're such a genius. You only thought about this, and the other part is like you're an idiot. This is never gonna work. And then you realize other guys, actually Venezuelans, thought about the same idea, and you go like, how does this happen? And I think that at some point people see, an opportunity and dive into it. So I initially thought that it was illegal. So I started like researching this, and I'm like, oh, cool. I call my lawyer, right? Laureen, rest in peace. And she's like, no, you're nothing in title law that says that you cannot, sell a house and rent it back. So I know that if I'm gonna go to my partners, which Jack knows very well, hey Jamie, so I have this idea, and start throwing shit against the wall, they'd be like, no, right? So I write a business plan, right? Which I'm very good for it when somebody hires me to do it for somebody else, but for me, I'm like kind of like, I see the whole picture, right? So I go research, write a whole business plan, present it to my partners, and they're like, we don't think it's gonna work. And when you love an idea, right? When you love a concept, when you really believe that you're solving a pain, right? They tell you that now it's not gonna work, you'll be like, watch me, right? So you have a problem, right, as an entrepreneur, which is really good ideas are made by entrepreneurs who don't listen to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Entrepreneurs hit the wall and die when they don't listen to anybody else. So it's the good and the bad. So I out of respect for my partners, I said, listen, we have a company that's together, that's via residential. I'm gonna start developing this on my own, obviously on my own time. Like, my hobby is to work and to read and to, originate things. And so I started doing it as my bastard child. Like literally like on the side. Okay? Because the first thing to sort of validate the idea is you create a website, see what happens, right? I call Andres Giraldo, which Jack knows, is Andres, create this thing called Sell2Rent. Now, where does Sell2Rent originate? If anybody's seen the movie Crazy People with Daryl Hannah and Dudley Moore?
It's been a while.
Right? But remember how they're like, they're very direct into the message? Right?
Keep going.
So I always had that idea that you call the things by what they are. Right? So sell to rent, right? We're gonna sell it and rent it, right? And so I said, Andres, create a website called Sell2Rent, and let's start creating some content for it, see how it works. And we started getting some phone calls. And this is 2019. Okay? And I started talking to the usual suspects, my friends at the big single family funds. And I said, I have this idea. And they're like, well, it's interesting. Of course, I called Jack and Fred, and they're very dear friends of mine. And, they're like, I think it's a good idea. Right. And in a way, we started getting people says, I want to do this thing. And in my mind, my model was, I'm going to take this house that people, call me about, and I'm going to sell it to the funds. And if the funds buy it, great. If they don't, then we'll, next. There was no need in my mind for the mom and pop because, the funds transact very quickly. I don't have to deal with the, subject to finance, people kind of like, giving the runaround and trying to talk directly to the seller. So I thought that the model of selling to the funds was much clearer. Okay. I remember it's 2019. It's December. It's the IMN in Phoenix. I'm talking to Dallas Tanner, now the CEO of IMN of Invitation Homes. And Dallas goes, great idea, but you know what? You should name it like leaseback.com or something like that. Would be really cool if you have leaseback.com as your website. And at that moment, I was trying to negotiate leaseback.com. So I called Andres Giraldo. I'm like, buy it now, right? Put in the credit card. It cost like $50,000. So yes, I do own leaseback.com. But the bottom line at that moment, I also convinced Invitation Homes to give us a shot at, selling them one of the properties. So we had this property in North Carolina. I forgot the name of the guy, but he was a rocket scientist. That I remember. The house was perfect. And we started doing the transaction, and in the middle of the transaction, COVID hit. And so suddenly nobody's buying a home. And I'm like, I know that there's a pain. I know that there's people who need these things, right? But suddenly all the business sort of idea that I had that, hey, let's go shake the tree, whatever falls, we send it to institutional buyers, gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you're an entrepreneur and you hit the wall, you can jump it, go around it, make a hole, but don't stand still. So I figured that this was an opportunity to sort of recalibrate our business model. And I started thinking about how do I sell properties to the mom and pops? So you have two big problems, which is I might know certain mom and pops, in South Florida, maybe in Baltimore, because I have friends and friends. But how do I find a mom and pop in Alaska if a lady calls me from Alaska? And that's what I created, what I thought was the Alaska problem, or I denominated the Alaska problem. So as an engineer, I put the problem first, and I say, how do I solve this thing? And I go like, this is a data problem. Because we know who owns all the houses in the United States. And if I can look at data and identify who is an owner occupied and who's an investor, and kind of figure out who's buying in that block in Alaska, I can sort of reach out to them. And that's when I realized that in creating my business model, which I was originally selling to the funds, I wasn't really creating a universal solution. I was creating a very specific solution that would not solve the problems for people who were not in places where the funds were buying.
Sure.
And that's what got me really excited. Because that's when I saw, this has worldwide applications. This can be, used in Spain and in Colombia and Brazil and Singapore, whatever it is. Right? But most important, if it becomes a data approach instead of a relationship approach, right? Then we solve it. And we started creating, back then it was called an algorithm, now it's called AI. So I sat down for about 2 months. And when I say I sat down for 2 months, obviously in my spare time, flashes of thoughts at some point. And I sort of started looking at data, and I'm like, how do I solve this problem just looking at data? And I started creating an algorithm, and the algorithm right now is patent pending. But the bottom line is, if you give me a house right now, any house in the United States, I'm going to run it through my algorithm and give you a probability that the house will be purchased by an investor. So the easy way to think about this, right? If you have a 3-2 in a place where everybody's buying 3-2s, then, high probability, right? If you have a 1-1 in the middle of the boonies in a farm, very low probability, right? Again, there's about 10 factors that we're looking at, and we're, sort of every 2 or 3 months, we're coming up with an additional factor that helps us get better accuracy for that. And so as we started, so like, okay, now there's a new model here, right? It's working. And this is 2020, middle of COVID. Plenty of time to think about other things, right? And so the big issue with entrepreneurship is it big? Is it small? Is it a $1 billion company? Is it a $10 billion company? Is it a $1 trillion company? Okay. And now I have to sort of sit down and say, you know what? I'm 51. Is it worth it in, my 50s to start a new company and, really put my heart and soul into it? The time that I had on the side. And it had to be a big problem. And then I started doing the research on who the user for this is. And so, when Jack started saying, oh, yeah, but this is an issue of, the high rates, and because of the high rates and so forth and so on, Jack, 800,000 couples divorced every year. Rates being high or rates being low, they get divorced. And, if you use about 60% home ownership, which by married couples should be higher, that's 500,000 homes. That's big, man. That's 10% of the 5 million homes that are sold every year. Right? And I think that that by itself creates a big market. There's 2 million people who retire every year. And most people retire every year on their home, and they have a whole lot of equity. And, one of the things that really pisses me off is that you have all this, baby boomers who work their asses, and now the only way to cash out of their home is
to move.
Reverse mortgage. A reverse mortgage is a scam, man. It's just like, if you go through the fees that they charge and the whole thing. So I'm getting excited because, now I'm seeing that this is a solution for people that needs optionality in their homes. Not a perfect solution, by the way, because everything that is not selling the home outright is not a perfect solution, right? Because your comparison is, and then you have 2.5 million people that apply for a cash out refi and get denied. Now, whether the rate is low or high, it might be a question of, DSCR and loan to value, but at the end, that the mortgage industry has become so strict, right? There's no more ninja loans or anything like that. We actually have to prove that you have, the money to pay. And so what happens is you have all this equity in your home, and you got fired, and you want to access it, you can't, because now you don't have a job, or you run into like medical problems, and then your credit score sucks because you haven't paid your medical bills, right? Or you realize you were extending your credit card. So I think that the logic of leasebacks is that there's social pain and economic pain, and the social pain, look at it as divorce, or maybe the desire to move somewhere else in 2 years from now, and you don't want to deal with that. Or the social pain might be, I just don't want to, take care of my house anymore. I want somebody else to call the plumber and the roofer and the whole thing. And now there's another thing, Jack, which is in certain places, obtaining insurance as an individual has become too costly. It's cheaper for the single family funds to have insurance on your house than for them. So they said it's cheaper to rent than to own. It's correct, right? Because somehow the single family funds have access to cheaper money and cheaper insurance and so forth and so on, right? And then there's the economic problems, which is people in foreclosure, people with too much debt, people who get fired from their job, and
divorce.
So I think huge market. I wrote a white paper that I believe I shared with you, Jack, and you can send it to Craig and you can put it in, about about leasebacks and how leasebacks can actually create a very interesting strategy for single family investors. Not only because it has access to a sort of a house that it's already rented with a better tenant, okay, but equally important that you have a tenant that will stay there for a longer time.
Yeah. The expense ratio, the long-term expense ratio, is the piece that most landlords, or that kills most landlords. They think it's going to be a 30% expense ratio. They lever the property up, and it turns out it's a 50% expense ratio.
That's true.
And but I think that the case for the sale leaseback, the sell to rent scenario, genuinely does have a very low expense ratio because. Well, tell us why.
You tell me why you think, and let's talk about it. In your perception, why?
Yeah. So what kind of as he's explaining the business model and like what the advantages are to investors, you've got a tenant that's in place day one, so there's no leasing fee, no upfront leasing fee, right? You're getting rent the day that the transaction closes. The resident has been used to maintaining that house, and prior to closing everything good, bad, and ugly about that house. So you have a good sense of housekeeping, deferred maintenance? Are these the folks that have like never invested in anything, or have they been keeping the house up? And so you've got a better sense to, they're not, nothing, their world doesn't change, right? Like they're not going to all of a sudden change their housekeeping based on the fact that they're not on the deed anymore. Mm-hmm. It's their home. All their stuff's already on the wall. They're moved in. It's their couch, all that stuff, right? And then because they engaged in this transaction, not because because they wanted to access their equity, but specifically because they didn't want to leave, one would expect that unless they've disclosed something to you on the front end, that they're going to stay there for a long time. And so you're not going to have the vacancy loss, downtime, turnover costs, releasing costs that are the piece of the expense ratio that I think most investors fail to account for adequately. That they account for property management, maintenance, insurance, property taxes, but they don't account adequately for the turnover reserve, releasing reserve, what the real vacancy loss is based on actual downtime. They just say 5% as if that was like the number, right? And so those major expense categories that turn a 30% underwritten expense ratio into a 45 or 50% expense ratio really don't exist in the sell to rent model. And so you actually do have a very low expense ratio under that scenario.
A couple of things that are interesting. A while back, I did some research, and I looked at the exit polls that single family operators do when people leave their homes. Like, you rent it and they leave. And I basically concentrated in the people who were leaving the home in the first 12 months. And about 50% of the issues of people leaving their home the first 12 months had to do with the fact that they didn't know that home before. So think about it. You rent a home, you realize that you're downwind from a water treatment plant. And, every day at 7 o'clock with the downwind, your house smells bad. Or at 4 o'clock, you're like 4 blocks away from a railroad crossing and you're waking up. Or you have, 3 babies and your dog has 3, pit bulls, right? Yeah. Or the school system sucks, or your neighbor sucks. And so a lot of the turnover exists in our industry because of people rent a home and they don't like it and they leave immediately. Now, one of the things that obviously you get when somebody who's been living there for 5-10 years before, it's they already like it. But most important, they have this emotional attachment to that home. Mm-hmm. And then, there's something in that neighborhood anchoring them. My cousin lives 3 blocks from there. My right. Kids have all their friends there, right? So right. Another survey we did later. Yeah. Another survey we did later, early on when we launched the idea, a lot of people thought that the idea was too good to be true. Literally, it's too good to be true, right? And one of the things that they constantly keep on asking is like, will my family know I did a leaseback? Will my kids know? Right? So in some cases, it's like, hey, listen, I don't want to list it. Don't put it in the MLS. Don't put a sign in there. Don't promote it anywhere. My wife is the only one that knows. My kids don't know, period. Okay? And that is the emotional attachment to the home, in which we've seen people sell homes for cheaper than market, which it needs to be because investors will not buy a home if it doesn't have a certain cash flow. And sometimes the market rent is, let's say, call it $2,000 of market rent, and so times 12 is 24. At 10% gross, it's 240. And any investor will say, well, Danny, great house, but I don't pay more than 240 for that because I need to be at a 10 gross. And the house is worth 300. That means that the homeowner is leaving $60,000 in the table, right? Or $50,000, maybe 20%. We have seen transactions where people like Jack are saying, well, I get that it's a 10 gross, but because, I have a really high quality tenant, I'm willing to pay a little bit more. But that little bit more is not halfway. The persons who are leaving most on the table are the homeowners. And they're doing it consciously, because we tell them, listen, their market price of your house is, whatever, 280, 300. You're going to sell it for 260. Do you understand that? Yes. Why? If you have, I understand if it's like a 40-year-old home where you grew up there, or, it's been 15, but I have conversations where, like, hey, you're selling your home for $50,000 less. This is for a person that actually $50,000 is a lot of money. Why don't you rent the same exact home? Because this happened in an HOA, bunch of same homes, that it's 2 blocks from you in the same HOA, and sell it retail. Like, now I want to sell it. So in my mind, she's leaving $50,000 in the table. In her mind, she's like, I bought it for 200. I'm selling for 350. I'm making 150. And that's my point, Jack. That you and I and the investors look at this logically, but the emotional attachment that it's there, it's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part, and I think it's important, it's not going to be a perfect solution. People 6 months from now, a year from now, are going to say, oh, you know what? I sold my $300,000 home for $250, but I get to stay here. We tell people, listen, you want to stay. You told me you're getting divorced. You told me that you want to stay. You're more than welcome to retail it. And eventually they get to stay there. Right? So it is not a perfect solution, but it's the solution at this moment. For
one of the things,
hundreds of people.
Like, one of the things when Danny was explaining this concept to me, that I got like excited about, was we bought a lot of foreclosures, right, from 2008 to 2018, and we kept a bunch of our first, whenever we buy a property, we knock on the door, right? We knock on the door, we see who's, if it's occupied, right? We buy a lot of occupieds, that happens, and knock on the door and have a conversation with the folks who are there. And, solution one is, can we figure out something with the occupant for them to stay here, right? Like, I don't want a vacant house. Like, if this person's here and they want to be here and they can pay something that I can make work in terms of being able to pay my mortgage, that's best case scenario, right? And so that's always our first, the first goal is can we make a deal? Can we do business with the person who's there to keep them in their home? And over the years, we've been able to do that about 80 times. So in our rental portfolio, we've got 10% of our rental portfolio is folks who we bought a property at the courthouse steps. We knocked on the door. They said, hey, yeah, I got behind on some medical bills, or I lost my job. The bank wouldn't let me reinstate. And so I ended up at the courthouse steps, but I'm working again. Or that was a one-time issue, but I'm still working. And so, yes, I can pay. And we say, hey, all right, well, what can you afford, right? I don't want to set rent at market so that you can't, or at a place where you can't afford it. I also don't need to, right? Like, to Danny's thesis here of, there's a lot of expenses that we can all avoid by converting the person who's there into the tenant. I don't need to pay full market rent. I don't need to charge full market rent because I'm going to have a lower expense ratio. So I can set a below market rent that they can afford, but my net income is still the same, is still the same as if I had kicked them out, put money into the house, and then rented it to some new stranger that I just met off of, rentals.com. And so we have no turnover in that segment of our portfolio. Those folks have been there for 15 years in those houses, and they never turn over. Because it's their home, right? It was their home. It still is their home. They are still there 15 years later. They've got a situation where they're getting a little bit better deal on the rent, and they're not going to find that rent down the street. And so it's just been a tremendous win-win, both for the occupant, the investor, and frankly the neighborhood, right? Because they've got stability, right? You've got the stability of a home ownership outcome that just happens to be, where the occupant isn't on the deed. So that whole thesis really rang true for our experience as a landlord. So that was something
I have so many questions, Jack. We talk about the emotional side of this and the economic side of this. Danny, you can jump in. It looks like Danny's actually closing the deal currently that he's working on. So
I wish I was looking. I wrote an article a while back ago. This was, I believe, in 2019, that it was to use residential leasebacks as a loss mitigation tool, and that was published. I'm gonna look for it, but the bottom line is, I'm basically calling for the government, okay, to say that before you go through a foreclosure, right, the person should be given the opportunity to do a leaseback. Like, it should be mandated as a loss mitigation tool, right? And I think that the obviously the downside for that is that you're gonna have, as an investor, a tenant that basically didn't pay their mortgage. But the fact that somebody didn't pay their mortgage, that doesn't mean that they couldn't pay their rent.
Right.
So
it means
Jack,
they had an event. It means there was an event. There was a trigger.
To both of you, it's not an easy pitch to walk into a person who is in foreclosure. A lot of times they're in denial about it. It's usually at the last minute. Jack, you mentioned the courthouse steps when it's too late at that point to do anything. And so I guess in their heads, it's like, well, I'm either going to leave this house that I know and love and go get another house, or I'm going to listen to this guy who's standing at my doorstep right now. And I can't imagine that's always an easy pitch for people that are probably in a higher emotional state at that point.
Yeah, pre-foreclosure work is, one, legally very risky, right? First and foremost. And
right.
Two, yeah, that's hard work, right? Door knocking pre-foreclosures. Whew.
Yeah, it's tough.
So, Craig, the biggest issue is that, and this is where I take beef when people says, oh, you know what, you can automate everything. Like, we talked to some VCs who are interested, but
right.
This is a very high touch model, okay? Because you're dealing with people who are in pain, and you need to explain to them. And again, we in Sell2Rent, we have this concept that we've been entrusted by the homeowner with their inner and most important secrets. I'm getting divorced, or I'm being foreclosed, or I have all these problems. And so one first thing is do no harm. So we don't want to take advantage of anybody, right? We want to be clear and explain everything to them. We are not the ultimate buyer. I believe that for a model to be truly universal, you cannot be buying the home. So one of the things we do is we match investors with homeowners, right? Because if we can do that, that means that we can solve the Alaska problem. If we were the ultimate buyer, it means that we're becoming a single family fund again.
Sure.
Right? And how do I deal with a property in the middle of the boonies, right? Where, places that I don't have access to. The second part of that is that because we are not buying the home, in the conversation that we're having with the homeowner, I'm not incentivized to get the cheapest price. And so that's huge, right? Because I'm not a wholesaler who is taking advantage of somebody and trying to get the cheapest price to get the biggest delta. So sometimes we have homeowners that they think that their home is worth 300, and go like, no, it's worth 350. We tell them the truth, and we tell them, listen, you're 65, you have great credit, you have a lot of equity in your house. Why don't you do a reverse mortgage? Why don't you do a cash out refi? Because the last thing that you want to do is you spend all this time and energy with this homeowner for them to find out later that, this solution that you're providing is not the best.
Sure.
We will only give them the leaseback solution when it's the only leaseback solution. And so when you're talking about people with stress, unfortunately, you have to do a lot of hand-holding and walk them through a problem. And so the biggest problem that they have, number one, is, but I'm going to be paying more for rent right now than I pay for a mortgage. Well, yes, because you're paying a mortgage for $150,000 and your house is worth $300,000. So if you were doing a full refi cash out, now you have to pay a mortgage for $300,000.
Right.
Danny,
as simple as that, as that explanation, they still don't get it.
Sure. Can you, so let's say I've got a neighbor around the corner. He's got a couple $100,000 of equity in the place. going through a nasty divorce. Somebody's got to, somebody gets to stay in the house, but they can't really afford it. When you approach this person, can you kind of go through the numbers on that? So if a person has significant equity in the house, and that's really what they need at that moment.
Sometimes it's not an equity issue.
Okay, well let's for this part of the conversation pretend that it is. Are you able to give them any sort of equity back? Are you unlocking that equity with the sell to rent? So you've got $200,000 of equity. We're going to buy this house at this price, and we'll be able to stroke you a check for $50,000 type thing.
Yeah. So let's go through a transaction. Let's say we have a house in Maryland. Actually, we do have a house in Maryland, I think, for sale. And so what happens is I call Jack and I say, first of all, I'm sorry, your neighbor, you introduce him to your neighbor. It's a guy in Maryland, whatever it is. Calls me up and says, Danny, I have this $400,000 home.
Mm-hmm.
I owe $300,000 on it. I would like to get some cash out of it. So I go like, Bob, great, not a problem. First of all, your house is not worth $400,000. Where did you get that number? They go like, oh, Zillow, right? And so the first thing that we do is we make sure we're talking expectations, right? So assume that Zillow is correct. Assume that Zillow is God's worth, 400. And I called Jack and I said, hey, Jack, listen, man, I got this $400,000 home in Maryland, close to where you guys are, right? How much will you pay for it? They'll be like, listen, Danny, the interest rates right now are high. I need to make a 6% cap rate at a 40% expense ratio. It means that I need to be at a 10% gross, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, here's the address. And he goes, well, here's the thing, man. The market rent in that property, it's, call it $2,500.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So times 10, times 12 is $30,000 at a 10% gross is $300,000. Let's say Jack is, smart investor, which he is, and says, you know what? I understand that this guy is not going to sell a $400,000 home for $300,000. And I understand that also I'm going to have less expenses because he's going to stay there longer. So you know what? I'm willing to take a 9% gross because my operating margin right now, it's not 40, but 30.
Exactly.
So I call Bob. Says, Bob, good news. I got a buyer for your home. Okay. But, man, your home, unfortunately, is only worth $330,000. And that's with a guy that I know is a nice guy and is going to execute. It's not that your home is worth $330,000. It's that your home is worth $330,000 to an investor.
Mm-hmm.
And why is it worth $330,000 to an investor? Because interest rates are so high, right, that he needs to be at a 6% cap rate. When interest rates were low, he could have been at a 5% cap rate. Okay, so when interest rates were low, the retail and the retail price of the property and the cap rate price were more or less the same. So now I have to call Bob and say, hey, Bob, your $400,000 home, we're gonna sell it for $330,000. And he goes, no way, Danny. I'm like, you're correct. If I was in your shoes, I wouldn't leave $70,000 on the table. Go sell it. And he goes, no. Why? Because I really, really, really want to stay here. Because my kids are going to school, and for me, having the peace at home and, the whole thing with my wife, and, we're getting divorced, might as well not take the kids out of their environment. The grandparents live across the, the home, the whole thing. So there is a delta in which people are willing to leave money on the table.
Sure.
Right? That is way much higher than I initially thought it was. Wow. I always thought that was going to be between 5 to 10%, and it's between 10 to 15%. It gets to a point where if it's too much, the person is going to go like, no way.
And so in that case, he sells you the house for $330,000. He gets the difference between what he owes and what he sold it for.
He doesn't sell me.
I'm sorry.
House.
Sells Jack. I'm with you.
Then once we understand that the numbers make sense, I put the house under contract and then I assign it to Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But you have to understand that when people call me, not every house I know an investor. So what we do is a little bit of reverse engineering. We're like, listen, this is how much your house is worth. This is what the market rent is. Okay. And these are the numbers. If they make sense, let's put the house under contract and let me find, and using my algorithm, let me find that investor. So we always have this conversation with Jack and Fred, whether it's a chicken and the egg, do we need more people to sell or investors? I think it's an investor problem. I think so. The first thing that we did is we made sure that there was enough market out there that we can attract homeowners, and we already a little bit cracked that problem. And now we're going back to the investor problem again and trying to make sure that we can do it in a more sort of immediate way. So now we're starting to look at, enhancing our AI. And the biggest issue, the biggest issue that we have is, let's say that I know Jack buys in that neighborhood, but I don't know Jack. He's never going to pick up my phone. Right? He knows me. He doesn't even pick up my phone when I call him. Imagine,
Sure.
him picking up the phone when somebody else calls him. Right? And how many text messages do you get? Hey, Jack, do I have a big property for you can buy for me? Right? So sometimes it's just the question. Again, it's the last mile problem, which is the human problem. And one of the problems that I think that PropTech has, and in general, this approach to automate everything, is that there's certain problems that you can automate. Think about it. Buying a car should have been automated a while back. You should not be going at this moment to a car dealership. There's more car dealerships now than there were before. Why? We're not masochists. Nobody likes to go buy a car, but yet we do. And is the simple thing of buying a car? Yes, because at the end of this is the emotional concept of, I'm selling my house. I am buying a house. I need to talk to somebody. And that's what this thing's about, taking the realtors out of the equation. I don't think it will work that well. I always say the more you automate, the more you have to humanize. Mm-hmm. And that's where PropTech gets it wrong. PropTech things is about technology first and property second. It's PropTech. It says property first, technology second, right? This is the reason you have to connect with human beings, and these are human beings who are in a level of distress. And so I have to explain to them a lot of things that a computer cannot. I mean, conversations where people are actually crying on the phone. You have to hear them, understand their pains, and guide them through the conversation. Because at the end, what happens is, you also have to understand how good of a tenant they're going to be, and go back to Jack and say, Jack, can you move $10,000 because this guy's going to be there for 15 years and the house is in perfect shape. Right? Yeah. Look at him. He's been living there for 10 years. The house is immaculate. He's going to be a great tenant.
I see the, I see the potential on the home seller side, on that side. Jack, do you see his problem now as more of finding the investors? Because I think in such a low transaction, kind of needle in a haystack environment, there's a lot of guys out there looking for deals that just aren't deals.
It's gotten,
do you see it as that big of a problem?
Yeah, it's gotten harder because of the cost of capital, right? Like before, being able to make the mortgage, like the gross yield that we needed before, when we were borrowing money at 4%, you could get away with buying at a 5 cap, buying at a 5 handle cap, buying at a 6 cap max, right? And so you could buy it at 8 gross. Under this model, you could buy it at 8 gross and still make your mortgage payment. But now an 8 gross just doesn't going to work. And V hasn't come down, right? The borrowers, the seller's Zillow value, right, has not moved down, but the gross yield that we're able to make the mortgage payment, right, has gone up. And so, though I think that the rent buy has moved in Sell2Rent's favor, because now the cost of renting is cheaper than the cost of ownership. If he can bridge the gap with the seller for them to understand, but you're going to have $100,000 in your pocket. And so versus a cash out refi, this is definitely a better option, right? I think this is that argument has become a lot easier. Mm-hmm. But the overall numbers from the investor's perspective, there's less liquidity for the investors because of our higher cost of capital. and as a result, higher implied cost of equity, right? Like any money that we have to put into a down payment has got a higher opportunity cost right now. So that side of the equation has become a little bit more difficult. And Danny's trying to strike the balance in between in a moving market, right?
Yeah. So I sat down with one of the biggest single family funds, and they said, we love the idea. We read the white paper. I think you were spot on, but we're not going to start buying this asset class until you can prove that you can source 1,000 homes per month. Right. So we're I bootstrapped the shit out of Sell2Rent. Now it's time to grow it. And I put $1 million of my own money before I went to my friends and asked for money. And now, we sort of pressure test. I brought in a co-founder, Alex Arguelles, amazing guy. Jack knows him, 35 years old, rocketing his, just basically walks fast. My job is just to get out of the way. My job is I'm the idea guy, and Alex goes and executes, and I get out of the way. And now one of the things that we've done a lot, and I think that this is, now let's talk a little bit about the entrepreneurship side of companies. I think that one of the failures of companies is when they have too much money. So VCs will give you $10 million, like grow. You start hiring people like there's no tomorrow. You think you're hiring experts, but they have great resumes. And when there's a mistake, there's so much money and so much people, you never find the mistake until it's too late. And so I have on purpose created a company that is, very cash strapped. Every mistake we make, it's there. We have hired, out of the 30 people that we have, 26 are in Latin America. So we're, COVID basically incentivized us to do that. I was already doing it a little bit before. I do think that, in there, not only you get amazing people, right, but you get to pick a lot of people who don't have to be locally, right? And so, we run, we run the company for very little money, okay? And so with this brand new ideas, instead of just basically throwing money at the problem, you have to throw sort of head and resources at the problem. The resources is you have to fail. You have to fail. You have to test the pipes, make sure where they leak, create the problem, solve the problem, course correct. And it's hard when you're doing it without runway.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard when you're doing it without runway because you're creating a lot of stress, right? The credit cards are full up to the max, and I kind of do it on purpose so people understand that, what, hey man, right? Yes, we're funding. We have $1 million that we already put into it. We have another $1 million of seed money. Now we're raising another $1 million. So for those of you who like the idea and want to invest, call me. But I think that at the end, if this is successful, and I think it will be successful, it will be a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, certainly. I'm going to write a book that's called Runways for Pussies.
I love that. That's fucking awesome.
And actually, I'll tell you a true story. So when I was doing my MBA in Philly, I actually learned how to fly. And my flight instructor, we were flying out of Northeast Philly Airport, big corporate airport. It's like, you have the runway between this number and this number, otherwise you're dead. Because if you learn how to land the plane in this short of a runway, right, it means that you mastered the art of landing. Mm-hmm. Right? Anybody can create a company burning through $100 million.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But go create one, right, with very limited resources. And I think that is part of the entrepreneurial process. So for those of you who are hearing this podcast and thinking about your idea, think about how you bootstrap the idea. Make it work first. Put your money into it. Put your soul into it. Make sure that it's a big problem that you can fall in love with. I told people I fell in love with this problem because not only it helped people get out of a situation, it will make the world better. I mean, think about the hundreds of thousands of people who are out there who don't have a problem. It's okay. No economic problem, nothing, zero. But you know what? I have all this money sitting in my home. If somebody can come and give me a 10-year lease or a 5-year lease, and I can take this money and invest it in my business, right? It will be great. So there's a lot. I believe that, my estimation is that about 10% of the current transactions in the market, let's call it 500,000 out of 5 million, will be leasebacks. So my mission in life is to make leaseback as an alternative to selling. It's an alternative. It's an asset class. It's an the same way that you can say I'll take a taxi or an Uber. You can say I'm going to sell my house or I'm going to do a leaseback. And if we do that, because there's other people in the arena who are doing extremely good jobs, different models in a way, it means that there's other people who start feeling comfortable with the model. And I think there's another 10% of those transactions, another 500,000 transactions that will say, well, now that I can do a leaseback and I'm having all these economic pains, I'm going to put my house for sale. So you're going to have a lot of people coming out of the woodwork that said, well, now can I do a leaseback? I'm going to put it for sale. Mm-hmm. Right? So think about it, right? Somebody said, I have an issue, right? I'm having economic issues. I'm not getting a HELOC on my house or a refi cash out, right? I don't qualify for a reverse mortgage. And he goes, husband goes to his wife and says, I think we're going to sell the house. He's like, you're not selling this house over my dead body. Go get a third job. Right? I'm not going to move my kids in the next 6 years. Right? So we might be able to take that person and says, listen, we are going to get you somebody who will buy your house, give you a contract for 6 years so you can stay in your house for the next 6 years. And that's the other thing we do, Craig. It's not only we're only matching the person with the investor, mm-hmm. but we're trying to match the person with several investors who will compete for that property, given the most money in the best terms that person needs. And sometimes the terms are not economic. Sometimes the terms is like, hey, I want somebody who can give me a lease contract for 4 years. Mm-hmm. Right? And by the way, Jack, not everybody who's doing a leaseback is going to stay for 10 years. The people's like, hey, yeah. I want to do a leaseback because I'm going to go build my house and in 2 years I'm going to be out.
Yeah, and the scenario I like for that, even so they say, hey, yeah, I need a 2-year lease back, I need a 3-year lease back. Well, you've got as the investor that you've got enough current cash flow to pay your mortgage in the meantime, and you're buying it at a discount to the after repair value. You've been able to do a full walkthrough beforehand, so you know exactly what the property needs, and so. That's hey, you can choose 3 years from now to reassess the market and decide if you want to keep it, but that there's going to be some equity there where it could be a delayed flip, right? Like even when this person leaves, you spend sure. $10,000 turning the property over, and you're able to go tap that equity and flip the property, and by the way, and get taxed at capital gains because it's a flip 3 years from now, so it's a better tax rate too. I love it for that. Like land banking, right? Land banking, little chunks of equity, and getting paid a current to wait while for the opportunity to unlock that equity seems to me like a great little, great piece of the portfolio.
So Jack, I love the way you guys think also, and we've talked about this idea, which I think it's the next sort of step. Single family funds and institutional funds basically stop buying because they're not finding enough inventory because the cap rates are not there. My argument is, of course, you're not going to buy anything decent because everybody's fighting for food in the same cities. Everybody said, we need to buy in this type of cities because these are the cities where we can get critical mass, and we need 300, 400 properties to have critical mass in order to have a centralized management and take advantage of volume. I think one of the cool things about leaseback is that allows, the single family investor to start thinking about other things. And I believe that the real possibility, and this is one of the things that I cover in the white paper, is if you are able to, let's say that you create a buying strategy where you're not concentrating on the property, on the location of the property. You're concentrating on the quality of the tenant, which, by the way, it should be the thing, because Jack, if you can get a tenant for 20 years, you don't care what the property is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when I have these conversations with the big funds and I said, why don't you just start buying properties where, secondary, tertiary markets, you're not going to have concentration there. You don't need to manage it because, the person who's been living there for 10 years knows how to manage the home and fix it and the whole thing. Obviously, if there's a problem, you sort of give them your accountant Home Depot and they go and do it. And you have this pride of ownership that will make sure that the person's there, taken care of. And I have this conversation that in my mind, I envision a 10,000 home portfolio in 10,000 little towns across the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, no, it's not practical.
I think it's very practical. What
happens if one of the persons, decides that he doesn't want to rent there anymore? Well, you sell the house.
Yeah.
Right?
You sell the house and you know that you have equity in it. Yeah.
Forget about equity, right? Now, the fact that you sell it's a tail problem, right? It's the same problem of what happens if you have a house in the middle of Atlanta and a tenant destroys it, right? It's a tail problem, right? And somehow they're not getting it. They're still stuck in this box where you have to have things in secondary and tertiary markets where the school zone is this and blah 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 blah, because they're thinking that their exit is they're going to sell it as a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, if you buy properties in secondary and tertiary markets and you concentrate only on the quality of the tenant, first of all, the cap rates in secondary and tertiary markets are going to be higher.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of buying at a 6, you might be able to buy at a 7 or an 8. And because you concentrate and you only deal with tenants that meet specific criteria, right? Somebody's going to stay there for at least 5 years or 10 years. Somebody, when you look at the house is in very good shape, so they're taking care of the house. There might be exceptions, hey, man, I don't have money to change my roof and the roof kind of sucks, or I had this, economic problem. That's the reason why, we have all this humidity. But, somebody who you can understand and you relate to it,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge advantage. Having a perfect tenant versus having a perfect house in the perfect location. And then what you do is you just basically create this amazing cash flow that is very forecastable.
Yeah. I mean, that's the emphasis on the tenant, right? Like, which is commercial triple net lease, right? Like, it doesn't have to be triple net, but that's just the example. Like, buying a CVS, right? You're buying a CVS because you're really investing in corporate debt of the tenant there because they've signed a long-term lease. So if you can find a better way to underwrite the tenant, and that's going to be a credit, knowing that that's going to be a credit situation, and that the duration of that situation is going to be a long one, you absolutely should be able to, accept a slightly lower return and be very happy with that.
So why don't we start doing it, Jack?
Yeah, I was going to say, Jack, we've gone over here because I love talking to Danny, but Jack, I know you've wrapped your head around this for a while. Like, blow some holes in it, man. Where do you not see it working? Like, what are the problems that Danny is? Honestly, I think if we asked Danny, he would tell us. But blow some holes in it, Jack. Play devil's advocate here.
My only devil's advocacy is being able to generate enough deals that, given the current interest rate environment, cover. That's the thing that that I think is I think that's the hardest part. And so, do I have enough equity spread that if this tenant doesn't work out, I can get out?
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, is the expense ratio going to be low enough, given the current rent and the purchase price opportunity, that I can cover my mortgage? And to the extent that there is a gap there, how much cash do I have to put down to buy? Like, it's a DSCR loan purchase, right? Like, it's most likely a DSCR loan purchase. So, what's my return on the 25 points of equity that I have to put down to buy this property? What's my return on equity projection going to be? And for me, if all three of those things look good, I think I love it. Like, I'm a huge fan. Danny knows this. I'm a huge fan of this idea.
Yeah. So stop there for a second, because we sold a house, I believe, in Colorado, where the person basically prepaid rent for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
So when the buyer had to come to the table, 10% of it, the down payment was already prepaid rent.
Yeah, which is awesome, right? Yeah, decreases
And
your
so
equity requirement.
I think there's a lot of ways to gap that bridge, right? If you really think about it, right? You have a homeowner that becomes a tenant that now they have equity, and now you can ask for 3 months of security deposit, right? And so you have all this float going around, right? So again, Jack, I know that the economic issue is not going to work because you're trying to look at properties in Atlanta or in Baltimore, but I do believe that it works on a cap rate basis when that property is in secondary and tertiary markets.
Yeah, I think that I've been in Danny's ear because Danny doesn't want to buy them himself, and I absolutely understand the reasons why he doesn't want to buy the properties himself. He wants to remain an impartial advisor. He wants to also grow a business that is not that doesn't have a huge balance sheet requirement associated with it, because it's a different business model, right?
Yep.
And he's challenged, and I've, since I've expressed like, hey, I love this idea. He's like, great, man, go raise a freaking fund. Like, raise the freaking fund. I'm the source of inventory. What are we doing here? Like, what are you waiting for? And then I go back on Monday morning and I get punched in the face because of operations of running my Baltimore business and running a lending company. And, I never freaking work on it. But I think it's a phenomenal idea. I think someone should absolutely raise a fund, come to Danny and be like, I'll take everything you got. And
well, again, I'm sure that eventually the big funds are going to come around and do that. Okay. But the problem with the big funds is they're still going to be buying them only locally, right? In the Atlantas and the markets.
No, someone should raise a sell-to-rent fund, a sale leaseback fund that's market agnostic. It's the things that they're looking for. Market is not one of
different boxes.
It's not part of the investment thesis. Yeah.
Sure.
Right. So again, I'm gonna be in Baltimore for the IRR. I'm actually taking my wife and my kids. I'm dropping my daughter in Philadelphia. She's going to neuroscience camp in Penn. So
really, wow,
yeah, and so after that, I'm gonna take a couple of days, and I'm gonna go to Chateau du Fred. Stay there from Wednesday to probably Saturday.
Nice.
So I'm gonna be with my kids and my wife. So I'm gonna have plenty of time, and we can sit down and listen. I think Jack, that at the end, if we go to Wall Street with this idea, we'll raise the money. Okay. And I say we because I'm part of it.
Mm-hmm. Where are you getting inventory? Here's my guy. Yeah.
Sell2Rent cannot take the position of I'm a buyer, because when I become a buyer, then there's no money in the world that you can raise. Then you become the bitch of the money, and then I want to be positioned. And this is what I promise. This is what I tell the people who invested with me. We're a technology company, and the multiples on technology companies are staggering compared to the real estate. If you start creating a fund, then you'll be valued as a fund. Right? Mm-hmm. And a technology company can
be get net asset value on the real estate. Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I am not, and I don't want to compete with the people who are buying from me. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, but you're gonna give the good properties to Jack and the bad ones to me. So again, it has to be very transparent. But having said that, think about what I just said. Secondary and tertiary markets. How many investors are buying in secondary and tertiary markets that have the cost of capital that you will have by going to Wall Street, mm-hmm. right? Number one. And number two, that have the long-term view, mm-hmm. right? Because those guys are probably used to buying at an 8% cap rate or a 9% cap rate. And you're going to come into this, situation. You're going to give a fairly decent, offer to that person. And I think it's doable. I think there's right now plenty of people in the market with extremely good experience from operating funds that are being fired because the funds are not buying. So there's plenty of people. It's just a question of seeding this thing, buying 10, 20, 30 properties, making sure that it's scalable, and then going and raising the fund from Wall Street. And by the way, I think that when we go out and raise the fund from Wall Street, the rates will be low back again, so we can prove that a true leaseback fund can be accomplished. By the way, there's a company called Truehold that is a true leaseback fund, and they're basically buying out of the, you know, I think they're in Ohio, and they're gonna stay, you know, in all this, you know, states around there. Of course, you got Easy Knock. Easy Knock buys the properties themselves, and you know they're a very good company. And so, you know, Easy Knock in a way is a financial, you know, prop tech and, you know, fintech company. You know, they got into the HEIs and you know, rent to own. I'm sorry. It's a leaseback with the optionality to own it back again. And you know, we're not doing that. We tell the people you sell it, period. Okay. I'm afraid that David Sandman, who had a rent to own company called Halo, you know, said, you know, there's a lot of issues with the, you know, kind of the optionality you have in the possibility to own it, you know. And so I think that the model is going there. But again, if you want to talk about owning real estate, if you own 10,000 homes in the United States in secondary and tertiary markets that you bought at a 10%, 15% discount at an 8% cap rate, like true cap rate, and then you overlay the fact that you're going to have a 20% or 30% savings on expenses, which makes it a 10% cap rate, you're okay. You're going to be able to do that DSCR loan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have a date in Baltimore.
We have a date.
Good.
Jack, why don't you tie us up with a bow here?
Yeah, no, I've been a huge fan of Danny and his ideas, and Sell2Rent's, I think, a really exciting idea. I think it makes a tremendous amount of sense from an emotional point of view, as well as from an investor logical point of view. It fills it solves problems on both sides of the ledger, and that's what great ideas, great businesses, you know, have. And so, now I'm really excited to see how Sell2Rent continues to grow in the future. And Danny, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about it. Really appreciate your time, especially when you're closing a multi-deca-million multifamily deal on the same day. So,
yeah, listen, again, thank you for having me here, for your friendship, for Fred's friendship. Craig, thank you very much for, you know, hosting me. And you know, we'll talk in more detail in Baltimore.
Hey, Danny, if folks want to find out more about Sell2Rent or even get in touch with you to learn how to invest with the company, how can they find you?
So Sell2Rent.com, sell the number 2rent.com, Danny at Sell2Rent.com. You know, if you want to invest in the properties that we have right now, there's a marketplace, and you can actually go check the properties in the marketplace. If you are a homeowner who needs to sell their home and cash out as a renter, or any other questions you might have, just feel free to reach me. I'll guide you through what we think is the best solution for you. And again, our mantra in the company is we might not be the best solution, but we'll help you. You know, this is what I drill the people who work with me. And as much as, you know, this is a great opportunity, it's also an opportunity to help people. And I think that goes a longer way than the money we can create.
Jack, I find people like Danny so interesting because it's the book smart knowledge, the MBA, you know, but when you take all of that, you know, sort of intrinsic book knowledge and you add a heart to it, I think really great things happen. And Danny, that's when I've only had a couple occasions to speak to you, but your heart shines through, man. And I love man, I was so involved in these podcasts. I was listening where you were a guest, and I'm just blown away by the fact that, you know, you were a guy much like Jack. I used to walk around houses late at night in really bad parts of Baltimore with Jack, and you just don't find guys like that. I think there's so many investors these days that think they can sit behind the desk, look at the computer, and do transactions. And what I find is the guys like you who really get out there and meet the people, rub shoulders with the folks that you're helping, where these great ideas and great solutions come from. So it's just such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. All right, guys.
Good
Pleasure.
luck on the transaction today.
Thank you, man. Appreciate
All
it.
right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Hey, Jack, can you hang out for a minute?
Yep.
Are we done?
Yeah, we're done.
All right, cool.
All right.
Hey, Jack. See you.